So, back in December, DC Comics released a new line called the Absolute Comics. These comics were kind of another universe reboot. It takes place in what was it? What universe was it labeled as? I have everything written down. But Earth Alpha, because that's what it should be called. And it's kind of an Elseworld story. If you don't know what that means, it takes the characters and it kind of does them differently. For example, for Batman, they have him as a blue-collar engineer instead of a billionaire. And this version of Batman, due to where he is, what he has grown up as instead of normal Bruce Wayne, they have him deal a lot more with societal issues. One of the big ones that I really enjoy is how they look at and deal with gun violence. Because Batman's always had an issue with guns, but especially in modern takes, with how edgy people want Batman to be and how close to a killer they want him to be, he kind of just uses guns. And I like that they don't. I have read a little bit of Absolute Batman. I think it's really fucking good. I think the people freaking out about the logos should shut up. Also, cool thing about this Batman is he uses practical tools because he's an engineer. And I think that's super fucking cool. Absolute Wonder Woman. Woo woo. This version of Wonder Woman, she's more of a protector of humanity, in a way. And I think that's really nice. She doesn't really have her Amazonian heritage in the way that most versions of Diana do. Because most of the time with Diana, she's from this place, she's from these people, she's part of this big culture, and that's where, like, most of her personality comes from. But then, in this universe, she kind of didn't have that, so she's very different. There's a lot of defiance in Wonder Woman, whereas she's usually a bit closer to, like, the Boy Scout level, or I guess Girl Scout, but she has a lot of defiance, and she has a lot of struggles with the way the world works, not being with her sisters and in that sisterhood, and I think that's really cool. And then Absolute Superman, which is the one that I think most people are, like, positive with. I haven't seen negatives towards Absolute Superman. I have seen one misconception, though, and that's that people think it's another evil Superman. I fucking hate evil Superman. Maybe I'll make a video about that at some point. But Absolute Superman is really fucking cool. So, this version of Kal-El, instead of being sent to Earth as a baby right as Krypton is exploding, this version of Kal gets to grow up on Krypton. He's there until, I could be wrong, I'm pretty sure he's like 20 or something. I don't feel like getting all the individual details. This is already going to be a little bit of a long video. However, this version of Superman, instead of growing up with Ma and Pa Kent here on Earth, he grew up on Krypton. He believes in everything that they stood for and what they taught him, and I think that's super fucking cool. On Earth, instead of knowing who he is, knowing what he is, knowing what to do, he kind of has to grapple with a different sense of justice and a different, like, identity, because he doesn't know who he is. He's not the Clark Kent we know. He's not the Kal-El we know. He's not the goody two-shoes. This isn't evil Superman, which is good, because I fucking hate evil Superman. This is just a Superman who has to learn human emotions and human efforts and everything about us after growing up already. He doesn't get to grow alongside us. He has to make the conscious decision to open up and allow us in, and I think that's really fucking cool. There's more titles on the way, such as Absolute Martian Manhunter and Absolute Flash. I'm really excited for Absolute Flash. I think they're doing Absolute Green Lantern, but that's like that's where the DC Absolute Universe is. Long story short, they take a DC character, they find something that's really important to the character and how they're viewed in the zeitgeist and whatnot, and then you take that and you get the fuck rid of it. And I decided that I wanted to do something like that for Marvel. And then there's got to be 2 or 3 people who were like, oh, well, Marvel is already doing their own sort of thing with the new Ultimate Universe. But you're wrong, because the new Ultimate Universe, instead of taking parts of a character away, it's a version of the character that didn't become a superhero the way they were meant to. For example, Spider-Man, Peter Parker, becoming Spider-Man in his, late 20s, early 30s, rather than as a teenager. So, I'm going to get into this, and I think I wrote a couple, and I'm just gonna read them to you guys and give more little bits of information as I go. Hopefully this video isn't too long. Absolute Spider-Man. This is a version of Peter Parker that never really learns the great power comes great responsibility motto. This version of Uncle Ben isn't lost at any point, and instead of becoming this perfect goody-two-shoes superhero, he becomes a lot more of a genuine vigilante. This Peter would be a lot more akin to that of a Punisher or a Deadpool or a Wolverine. He wouldn't kill, but he wouldn't care about his, opponent in any way. This version of Peter wouldn't have a reason to think, I need to take care of these people, because he hasn't heard that motto. He doesn't know about what responsibility he has. He hasn't been pushed to that situation. And because of that, this version of Peter is really selfish. He's very antagonistic, and a lot of times he's a little bit closer to, chaotic good, maybe, genuine neutral. He's not as good a guy as we're used to. I love this idea for Peter. I have more written down and I'll get into it. I love the idea of a Peter who isn't taught to be a good boy. And I think something that could be really fun is later down the line with this character bringing someone like Miles in and having, instead of that version of Miles being, the same thing as Peter, having him be more akin to what we're used to for Spider-Man, which is having him be the good guy, having him come in and be super responsible, and having this younger Spider-Man kind of be the reason, or one of the reasons, that Peter has to grow into being a hero rather than a vigilante. I think that's really fucking cool. I wrote a couple villains for this Spider-Man. I believe I wrote 6, which was unintentional. But I'll explain those individually. I have a version of Norman Osborn who isn't purposely becoming the Green Goblin. Instead, he is being forced. I think Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin has 2 or 3 ways you can go with it. There is, he goes crazy, there is, he's pure evil, and there's, he's pushed into it some way. I like the idea of this version of Norman being an actual good guy. Have him, take care of shit. Have him help with charities. Have him be a genuine good person who is forced into to the seat of the Goblin by other villains. Have them threaten Harry or something. I don't know. I'm not a comic book writer. You people figure it out. But I think this idea of Norman not being the perfect evil villain is nice. I think it's a good change up. And I think having Peter have to fight somebody who he is close with without them being pure evil kind of makes it where this more offensive Peter has to start to care again. I like the idea of a version of Sandman who's a mutant. I think that could be really fucking cool. I have him directly tied to the X-Men. Maybe specifically have him tied to like fucking, I don't know, Iceman. I don't know. But a version of Sandman who, instead of having to get his powers from some big event and then it being I think that can be somewhat boring, not because it's a bad like intro to a character, but because of how many people that is. Like, so many characters, especially in Marvel, randomly get their powers, and I think it, after a minute, becomes boring. So a version of Sandman who's kind of born that way. He's a mutant, and he has to grow and hide this part of himself, and then someday it comes out, and he pretty much immediately becomes, like an issue. I think that's really cool. I like the idea of a version of Kraven who's more of a catch and release sort of hunter. So instead of wanting to kill everything, he simply wants to, like, prove he can hunt you. For example, if he's hunting, like, a tiger, he doesn't kill it. He barely attacks it. He just wants to be the best hunter. He has no reason to kill everything. And in this world where Peter doesn't necessarily care about killing, I think having one of the bad guys be the guy who is like nailing home the no, we don't do that, I think can be a really different take on what Peter needs to learn. I want a version of the Shocker who, after being beaten by Peter, takes up the mantle of Electro. I think that could be really interesting. I always love the character of Shocker, specifically Herman Schultz. I think he is so goddamn fun. I think he's one of the best personalities that's ever been handed to a, like, smaller villain. And the idea of him taking up the mantle of Electro sounds really fun. You can do that either via, like, upgrading his tech, or if you want to put him into a situation where he gets powers or whatever. Do whatever you want. But I'm a really big fan of Shocker, and I think pushing him to be a bigger villain is a good thing. Next villain is somebody who I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't mean to. I accidentally stole a storyline. I wrote this in I think January is when I wrote down the idea for the Spider-Man one, and then I decided to make more. I stole a storyline from Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Tombstone, who was Peter's friend in school, a younger, more hurt version of the character. See, now, Lonnie Lincoln being Peter's friend was something that I had never seen before when I wrote that. Now it's been put onto the animated screen, so I don't know if they would want to go straight into doing it. But I think it's a good idea. I love political shit in superhero stories, and the idea of a Lonnie Lincoln who's kind of pushed into becoming a villain by, like, political bullshit is really fun. Also, I love Lonnie. I love Tombstone. Tombstone's a villain who I fucking adore. So there's that. And then I have a version of the Lizard who, instead of working as a Jekyll and Hyde, he's kind of just Killer Croc. And not by character, just by how, like, the power set works. He's kind of born with the scales and shit. And I think that can be really fun. Don't take anything else from Killer Croc, though. I think Killer Croc is a fun character, and I think that the two characters are already somewhat similar, and the idea of merging their personalities at all is really upsetting to me, because I would hate that shit. So there's that. For allies, I think it'd be fun to see Peter associating with a younger Doc Ock. And instead of Doc Ock becoming a villain, this version of Ock is a little bit older than Peter, like maybe 20-something, but he's not an old man. And he's the actual hero of the city. This version of Otto is actually the Boy Scout. He's the mentor. Whereas Peter's a little bit of a nerd, like a nerdy bully, I guess is the right way to describe it. I think Peter having Otto as a mentor is always really fun. I think the best Spider-Man stories usually do something like that. It doesn't have to be Otto. He can have other mentors. I think the PS4 game has like my favorite back and forth between two characters ever between Otto and Peter. So, there's that. May and Ben are super important to Peter. And I like the idea of them being not only amazing parentals, but also being kind of an antagonist to Peter, but not in like a horrid way, because they want better for him. They want him to be a different version of who he is because they know what he can become. But Peter won't let them in. He won't let them show him to be better. And there will be a couple of times where like May and Ben get into like a verbal dispute with Peter about his behavior. And I think that'd be fun because of how important those characters are to Peter, especially the death of Ben and the life of May. I think both of those matter a fuckload to him. And if Ben's not going to die, I think there should be a back and forth between the two. And instead of Uncle Ben and his big message, Peter's going to have to learn to be a real hero when Otto's killed by the tombstone. Where Otto will say something along the lines of, men like us, we have a responsibility to be better, to better the world, not destroy it. And I'm not a poet. That you can fix that, you can make it sound better, you can make it sound worse, whatever. I'm not the writer, I'm just pitching an idea. But I love the idea of Otto being the one who's killed in front of Peter. I do not want Peter to immediately become a good guy. I think that would be incredibly boring. I think that would limit what you can write the story with. But the idea of it being Tombstone who does it, because then it's a mentor killed by a friend, I think there's a lot of drama there. Peter's going to remain dangerous and still be a lot more damaging and more Punisher styled. Still like injuring his villains and stuff, but he's still not killing them, but he feels he's not super selfish anymore. I would akin what he's becoming to that of like a lawful good Wolverine, I guess. It's like, I'm going to rip you to shreds. You're not going to die, though. And also, you're going to prison. I think a good romantic foil for him would be like a really goody two-shoes Betty Brant. I think that could be super fun. I really don't like Mary Jane, because it's just, hey, how many times can we break them up? And Betty Brant's somebody who hasn't really been a big part of Peter's romantic life in a while. So I thought, fuck it, bring her in. Make her a goody two-shoes and have that be like the back and forth between the two. Peter as Spider-Man is looked at somewhat like Batman. People are afraid of him. Like, street thugs who are not superpowered are genuinely terrified to, like, do their business in New York because of Peter. And I like the idea of other heroes questioning him, pushing what he does, and maybe even a couple of them being almost afraid of Peter. And in this universe, I like the idea. I love Peter Parker never letting people know he's Spider-Man. I think that's dumb. I think Otto Octavius should be the only person who learns at all. That's it. Not Betty, not May, not Ben. Just Otto, because he dies and then nobody knows. That's the pitch for Absolute Spider-Man. If you have any thoughts, negative, positive, whatever, comment. I'm going to go ahead and get into the next one, which is Absolute Daredevil. This version of Matt Murdock, instead of being a lawyer, takes the role of a judge. He's considerably older than most depictions. I would say somewhere in his late 40s. Matt is still blind. He still has his enhanced senses. However, this Matt doesn't really have a personal life. He works as a judge, he works as Daredevil, and that's it. He doesn't let people in. He never has. This version of Matt doesn't have friends. He doesn't have family. He has not let people in to let them become part of his life, which is probably the biggest part about Daredevil. I think the best part of Matt Murdock is how sympathetic and genuine he is on every level. Yeah, I have it written down. One of the biggest parts of Daredevil is how human he is, how empathetic, how forgiving, and how humble he can be. But this Matt isn't. He doesn't have that sympathy. He's not a villain. He's not super evil. He's just not as much of a good guy. He also isn't like Peter. He's not running around beating the fuck out of people. This is just a version of him that, as Daredevil, isn't much different. His crime fighting is almost the exact same. The only real difference is he doesn't have a personal life. He hasn't learned to. He hasn't grown to. So there's that. The only person who knows who Matt is his only villain, so far. You could always write more villains in. Oh, God. I need to get closer to the camera. And that's Wilson Fisk, who in this universe, instead of owning a bunch of businesses, owns a shitload of charities. And he walks around as, like, the charitable guy. And he knows who Matt is, because he kind of put two and two together whenever his judge was saying the same shit as the guy who kicked his ass last night. I think that could be really fun. I think for the first couple issues, I think you just have it be Loner Matt taking on Kingpin. And I don't... Well, more Kingpin's army. You don't want him just beating the fuck out of Kingpin very quickly. And I think for the first little bit, don't give him people yet. Have him grow. Matt having to stop Kingpin by stopping these helpful organizations is what's going to teach him that sympathy. He's going to learn that other people need him as Matt Murdock and as just a person more so than as a superhero or as a judge. But he learns that because of these homeless shelters, because of these spaces for women, because of these things that are helpful, that he is harming by attacking Wilson. I think you can introduce him to people in those. Introduce a homeless guy that's going to slowly become like his only friend for a bit. There's a lot you can do there. I love Daredevil. The Daredevil TV show is super fucking good. I think we should have gotten a Daredevil video game. I think I'm still a little bit upset that didn't happen. Maybe we'll get one someday. I don't know. But I love Matt. Matt's so cool. I'm glad he's coming to the MCU. I think a version of him that's a little bit further in the law life, where he's a judge, could be really interesting. A version of him that professionally is super ahead of most Matt Murdocks. However, in a personal way, has nothing. I think that could be really interesting because the parts of Daredevil that matter to people, of course, him fighting crime, of course, the suit, of course, being blind, but a humongous part of Matt as a person is his humanity and his sympathy. And I think getting rid of those, you really find a man who has nothing. And I think that's super fucking interesting. So that's my pitch for Absolute Daredevil. Absolute Wolverine, baby. Woo. In this universe, Logan is going to be Wolverine, and he's going to have two major changes. The first one is this version of Logan has no adamantium. He has his claws, he has his healing factor, he has his crazy senses, but no adamantium. I think having a version of Logan who is still dangerous, but isn't God, is really interesting. And then the second is that he's not anywhere near as much as a bad guy. He has a code. He won't kill unless absolutely necessary. And oftentimes, whenever he gets a villain or an opponent or whatever to the point where he could easily just destroy them, he tries to talk to them. He tries to get them to come to their senses. He tries to get something to happen. He's all about second chances. The biggest thing about this version of Logan is that he's all about second chances. He's all about growing, and he isn't the cold-blooded animal that we're used to. His main ally would be an absolute Magneto. a version of Magneto that's a good guy. Way back during the Holocaust, because this version of Logan is old as shit, as most are, he saved Charles and Eric, Magneto and Professor X. But shortly after, Charles is shot by a guard. After being shot by the guard, this will lead to Charles dying. But shortly after, Magneto learns of his powers because he freaks out and throws the bullet back at the Nazi individuals. Magneto is a good guy in this. He follows Logan almost as a sidekick, in a way. I would want this version of this Wolverine comic, I would want it to take place in, the 50s? It's after World War II, other than, the flashback to finding Eric. But it's there's that. And then for the most part, I would like it to be the 50s, maybe the 60s. I don't want it to be super close to the rest of the comics and stuff. Because I love looking at different time periods in comics. I think it's very interesting. The main villain is Sabretooth. He'd be just as evil and petty and everything as the Sabretooth that we're used to. However, I think something that could give them another hurdle for the character and for what Wolverine believes is have Sabretooth be Logan's father. And not just in, I impregnated your mom. That's the lore. Having it be there was that, but then he was also just a terrible parent for Logan. He's the reason Logan is the way Logan is. He's the reason Logan's a good guy. He's the reason Logan doesn't kill, is because he grew up with this horrible, destructive parent. And I think that could be really interesting for their relationship. I also think that it could be like a bombshell that Logan never tells anyone about, and then randomly Sabretooth talks about it. I think that could be really interesting. Also, this is just a side note, I think Sabretooth should have a little help friend that's just a giant fucking monster version of Toad. If you don't know who Toad is, it's not the Mario character. He's just a guy with a frog tongue who bounces around and shit. But in this universe, I think he should just be a giant fucking kaiju. I think that could be really interesting. Just a humongous fucking frog monster. I think that could be really fun. But there's the main pitch. I had a couple more ideas that I don't have written down. For example, I feel like Logan shouldn't lead an X-Men team. I think when you get to Absolute X-Men, you have all the characters lined up and stuff, and how different they are. I think Logan shouldn't be in charge of that. I feel like I want this Logan to be really fucking humble. I want him to be as close to a good guy as possible, as a good guy as possible. And I feel like after having mistakes and being the reason for a couple villains and stuff, I feel like he should be almost scared to lead a team. I think that would be really interesting. So there's Absolute Wolverine. Next up is Absolute Iron Man. Of all the characters who I have written down and stuff, but Spider-Man is the one who I put the most into. He's my favorite superhero. I'm going to. I love Logan. I love Matt. The next two I'm talking about, I do love. Iron Man is the character in this list who I know the least about, who I care the least about, so I tried my damnedest to get something put together. However, if it's lesser than the others, understand that the reason why is because I've read less. I've read 1 billion Spider-Man comics. I've probably read 5 Iron Man ones. So, there's that. A big part of Iron Man and his character is how high-tech he is, mostly based on his wealth. In this universe, I want Tony to be a hard-working middle-class man. In this universe, him and Pepper Potts are married. One day, Tony has a heart attack. And then he has to go to this experimental doctor for this heart transplant. And that's how he gets the arc reactor. Instead of just making it himself and being this incredibly, rich individual who can just do that, It's an experimental thing that nobody knows if it'll work, but he tries it, and that's how we get to this point. His suit is, I have it labeled as almost steampunk. I take that back. His suit's scrap metal. Like, it's not perfect. It's welded together well because he's a fucking middle class worker and he's really intelligent. Don't get rid of his intelligence. But it's still scrap metal. And instead of having crazy high tech like things, he has low tech things and a humongous fucking brain. He has incredible tactical things going on. Maybe at some point he was in the army or something. I don't know. He's a crazy tactician. I don't think this version of Tony really needs a whole rogues gallery. If you would prefer and you want to add more, go ahead. That's fine. I'm not going to complain. But I would prefer him to have two main villains. First of all, Whiplash. I love Whiplash. I also like the idea of Whiplash being a former ribbon dancer. I think that could be weird. Have this Whiplash be super eccentric, flamboyant, and maybe a little fruity. I love the character of Whiplash. I think I've seen him in the movie, I've seen him in games, and then two of the 5 comics I've read about Iron Man did have Whiplash in them. I think he's a really interesting character, and I don't think a lot of people like him very much. And I think having him be super artsy and super eccentric maybe can push that character a little bit more into like the public eye. Excuse me, I'm yawning. And then his second villain being his issues with alcoholism, because I need an excuse to do Demon in a Bottle. For those who don't know, in the comics, Iron Man has a long relationship with alcohol, oftentimes being a bigger villain than actual supervillains. And Demon in a Bottle was a very, very nice comic run. I haven't read through it all myself. However, I have listened to people talk about it and listened to somebody read through it. And if I had a way to read it, I would. I'm super interested, as I myself have had issues with alcoholism, as have many members of my family and such. And I think that could be really interesting. Later on, him and Pepper are going to have a child, and around that time, he's going to get past the alcoholism. However, for the first 50 issues, I think that should be the issue. I think he should have to deal with that. I think that should lead him to losing battles. I think that this version of Tony, who is still a genius, but A, is dealing with the alcoholism, and B, doesn't have the billions of dollars that the average Tony Stark has, can be a really interesting way to push the character out of its comfort zones and such. I don't have a whole lot more for Iron Man, because I don't know nearly as much about the character. However, moving to the next character, I have a lot more to say. Absolute Hulk, baby. Woo! Part of the Hulk story that is so important is that his powers are an accident. And when it happens, he very deeply wants to remove them. He doesn't want to keep them. He doesn't want to be this monster. And in this absolute universe, Bruce chose to do the experiment as a way to cure cancer. Not that he has it. Thunderbolt Ross has it, and Bruce wants to find a way to help him. Bruce is so involved in this because of his father-in-law, Thunderbolt Ross. When Bruce transforms into the Hulk, he can see everything. He sees every movement. It's still his eyes, his mind, just not his body. Hulk almost never shrinks to Bruce. For the first year, he does it once. When Bruce is in control, he is slowly dying of the same cancer as Ross. But when Hulk is in control, Bruce feels healed, healthy, strong, and confident. Bruce enjoys being Hulk. It's an escape from the life he's known. It's an escape from the pains he's had. It's an escape from the cancer he now has. He enjoys Hulk a little too much and starts to be overwhelmed by its power, and he's addicted to it, calling it a cure, saying that he needs to be Hulk. I think a good villain for him is, as always, Red Hulk, General Ross. I like the idea of Ross being in control of the Red Hulk, and to have this version of Ross really be a good guy. Show that he is not a villain, he's not crazy, he cares about Bruce, and I think that a lot of the antagonistic force in this universe, instead of being Ross fighting Bruce, it should be him talking to him trying to get him to agree, him trying to learn, him trying to teach him. And I think that Bruce should have to face himself a lot. I think this version of This version of Hulk needs to be treated like a fucking horror monster. Have him hide in the shadows and bust through a building. Have him unintentionally harming people. Don't have Hulk fucking killing people, but have him harming people and Bruce be so overtaken with what he is and what he wants to be and how he feels that he doesn't care. Have this version of Bruce not be evil in any way, but he's not trying to get rid of the Hulk. Hulk's a monster and Bruce doesn't care. I think during fights between Ross and Bruce as the Hulks, I think there needs to be a real thing where Ross is like telling Bruce, hey, we're harming people, we just blew up a fucking bridge, whatever, and have that be a way to hammer in A, that Ross is a good guy, and B, that Bruce doesn't care that he's destroying shit. I think for the first initial run, it should just be Bruce doing whatever feels nice for Bruce and Ross trying to stop him. I think you have Hulk become Bruce twice in the initial run, because I think if Bruce and Hulk are sharing the body 50-50, then the idea of Bruce being addicted and stuck as Hulk in a way that he enjoys doesn't hit as hard. Whereas if you push him to be different and shit, maybe you can get something to go on. I don't know how I want to envelop the story of him being in a relationship, because this version of Bruce is married to a certain someone who Hulk fans already fucking know, based on the fact that Thaddeus Ross is his father-in-law. In a final battle between Hulk and Red Hulk, I want Hulk to win. I want Hulk to absolutely fucking destroy Ross, but not kill him. And then I want Bruce to feel bad. I want that to be the real turning point of Bruce being like, oh, fuck. And then I want to play the transformation into Hulk as almost treat it as like an allegory for addiction. Have him try after this, and have the first initial run be that, and then after that first 20 or so issues, I think you have a while, maybe 10 issues, where it is Bruce trying to understand the Hulk. Him trying to get to the point where he can handle it without being stuck to it, without being... He doesn't want to get rid of the Hulk, but he does need to learn to control it. He needs to learn to not let it control him, and he needs to learn to continue being Bruce Banner the way he has been, without being this monster, without harming people. The entire world, including superheroes, are terrified of the Hulk. He needs to deal with that reputation. He needs to deal with the consequences of his actions. Also, in this universe, I want Hulk to be fucking huge. I love giant Hulks. I want 15-foot tall Hulk. I want him to have the big dumb head, since he's supposed to be built like a horror character. Bring back the Frankenstein head. I think that's always super fun. And currently, those are the 5 that I have written. If people are interested, I would love to make more. I have adored writing that and figuring out those ideas. I understand that the Spider-Man one was more fleshed out than the rest, and fleshed out than the rest, and that's pretty much entirely because of how much I know and care about Spider-Man compared to the rest. So if you would like me to go in and maybe flesh those out more, I can do that in an individual video. Please give me your comments on anything. It could be something you enjoyed, something you didn't, whatever. Take care of yourselves. Thank you so much. And, yeah, I don't know what else to say. Thank you. I love you guys. I love you. Bye-bye.